Your laptop battery isn't failing. It already failed, quietly, months ago. That sentence doesn't appear in any support article. It doesn't come from the technician. It doesn't show up in the pop-up notification that tells you to plug in your charger. But it is the most accurate description of what happened to most laptops currently in use. And understanding it changes everything about how you respond to what you're experiencing. The advice you received when the battery became a problem was probably about settings. Lower the screen brightness, close the background applications, enable battery saver mode, stop leaving it plugged in overnight, never let it drop below 20%, charge it in shorter sessions. These are the 5 or 6 recommendations that appear in every forum thread, every support page, every technology column written in the last decade. You followed some of them, maybe all of them, and the laptop still dies before the workday is finished, still requires the charger in the bag everywhere you go, still shows 100% at 8 in the morning and 40% by noon without anything unusual happening. Here is the part of the conversation that almost never happens. Those settings don't address what actually changed. The battery itself changed, not the software managing it, not the display reporting its percentage. The electrochemical structure inside the cells degraded, and no power setting in the world recovers electrochemistry. The laptop you bought 2 or 3 years ago carried a battery rated for a specific number of hours. That number is no longer accurate. It was never designed to remain accurate. The system showing you a battery percentage was calibrated for a battery that no longer exists inside your device. What you see on screen is a relative number. What you lost in capacity is absolute, and it happens so gradually that most people don't connect the timing. If this kind of breakdown is useful, and this channel covers several different device categories with the same level of detail, subscribing keeps that in your feed without any algorithm guesswork. A standard laptop battery operates on lithium-ion chemistry. When new, it holds a charge close to its rated capacity, but every charge cycle, every time the battery drains and refills, causes microscopic structural changes inside the cells. Lithium ions that once moved freely between the anode and cathode begin meeting resistance. The internal pathways narrow, the usable capacity shrinks. There is no announcement. The laptop doesn't slow down, the fan doesn't change, the screen doesn't flicker. The only visible signal is that the time between charges keeps getting shorter, so gradually that most people trace it back to their habits rather than to the battery itself. They start charging more often and assume they are simply using the device more heavily. The battery is doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to degrade on a timeline that the manufacturer anticipated from day one. The average lithium-ion laptop battery loses between 20 and 40% of its original capacity within 18 to 30 months of regular use. Not because something failed catastrophically, because chemistry follows a predictable arc, and the people who designed the device build their replacement cycle assumptions around that arc. Think about what that number means in practical terms. A laptop rated for 10 hours of battery life has, at 2 years of regular use, somewhere between 6 and 8 hours of real-world capacity, if it was well managed. If it wasn't, that number is lower. And the user who bought that laptop for remote work, for long travel days, for the kind of flexibility that was the entire reason for the purchase, is now managing around a limitation that was never disclosed at the point of sale. A replacement battery for a mid-range laptop costs between $80 and $150. For premium devices, certain ultrabooks, professional-grade machines, models where the battery is bonded to the chassis, the cost is higher, and the repair requires opening a device in a way that can affect the warranty, introduce new failure points, or require specialized tools that most people don't own. Across a household running 2 or 3 laptops, a work machine, a personal device, a computer shared by students, that replacement cycle represents $500 to $1,000 over 5 years, not for new devices, for maintaining the ones already paid for. Most people absorb that cost and move on. Some replace the device entirely, spending several times more when the battery was the only component that had actually declined. The laptop was fine. The battery was a chemistry problem, and chemistry problems have solutions that don't require replacement. Here is the point that changes the frame entirely. Battery degradation is not a laptop problem. It is not a brand problem. It is not a technology problem in the way the industry describes it. It is a knowledge problem. The information that would let an ordinary person slow degradation significantly, and in documented cases recover meaningful capacity from a battery that appeared to be end of life, exists. It has existed for years. It lives in battery engineering research, manufacturer service documentation, and technical literature that was never translated into plain language for the person who actually owns the device. That gap isn't accidental. A consumer who understands how to manage battery chemistry buys fewer replacement batteries. A consumer who understands how to recover partial capacity delays the device replacement cycle. Neither of those outcomes benefits the manufacturer. Both of them benefit the person sitting in front of the laptop at 7 in the evening, watching the percentage drop and wondering what they're doing wrong. They're not doing anything wrong. They were never given the information to do it right.